Church, can we talk for a minute about something real, something raw? Betrayal. Have you ever been stabbed in the back by someone you trusted? A friend, a family member, someone you would have given anything for, only to watch them walk away, lie about you, or leave you when you needed them most? Betrayal has a way of shaking you to your core. It makes you question everything, your worth, your choices, even your faith. But can I tell you something today? When people betray you, God will defend you. Betrayal is one of the hardest things to experience in life. It shakes you, wounds you, and leaves you questioning everything. But here's the truth. You will face betrayal at some point. It might come from a friend you trusted, a family member you relied on, or even someone you poured your heart and soul into. That's the reality of living in a broken world. People are flawed, people fail, people turn their backs when you least expect it. But here's the good news. While betrayal may catch you off guard, it never surprises God. His plan for your life remains unshakable no matter who walks away. Think about Joseph in the Bible. He was his father's favorite, gifted with dreams that pointed to a bright future. But his own brothers, the people who should have loved him the most, betrayed him. They threw him into a pit, sold him into slavery, and then lied to their father about it. Joseph went from being the favored son to a forgotten prisoner in a foreign land. That's betrayal at its worst. But what those brothers didn't realize was that their betrayal wasn't the end of Joseph's story. It was the beginning of something greater. Because even in the pit, even in the prison, God's plan for Joseph was still in motion. Years later, when Joseph became the second most powerful man in Egypt, he looked at the same brothers who betrayed him and said, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." Genesis 50:20. What does that tell us? It means betrayal does not have the power to cancel what God has planned for your life. People can try to hurt you, lie about you, or push you down, but they cannot stop the purpose of God. The only way betrayal wins is if you let it define you instead of refining you. Joseph didn't let the betrayal of his brothers make him bitter. He let it make him better. He kept trusting God even when things didn't make sense. And maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe you're in a season where someone you loved and trusted turned their back on you. Maybe you feel abandoned, used, or discarded. You don't understand why it happened and you don't see a way forward. But can I tell you something? Just because you feel betrayed doesn't mean you are forgotten. Just because people have turned their backs doesn't mean God has. His plan for your life hasn't changed. His purpose for you is still alive. If God allowed it, then He is going to use it. If He permitted it, He is going to redeem it. Your job is not to dwell on the betrayal, but to trust in the God who is still writing your story. No human action can override God's divine intention. What they meant for harm, God will turn into good. Stay faithful, keep believing, and watch how God uses even the worst betrayals to bring you into the best seasons of your life. There are moments in life when betrayal blindsides you. You never saw it coming. You thought that person would always stand by your side, that they were trustworthy, that they had your best interests at heart. But then, one day, you realize they weren't who you thought they were. Maybe they turned their back on you when you needed them most. Maybe they spread lies about you. Maybe they walked away without a second thought. When betrayal happens, it's easy to feel lost, confused, and alone. But even when you don't understand, God does. Even when you don't see the bigger picture, He does. God knows things that you don't know. He hears conversations you never heard. He sees intentions that were hidden from you. And sometimes the betrayal you are experiencing is actually God's way of removing someone who was never meant to go where He is taking you. When Judas betrayed Jesus, none of the other disciples saw it coming. Judas had been with Jesus for years. He had seen the miracles, heard the teachings, and walked side by side with the Son of God. If anyone should have been loyal, it was him. But while Judas was plotting in secret, Jesus already knew. He wasn't surprised. In fact, at the Last Supper, He told His disciples that one of them would betray Him. Why? Because God is never caught off guard. Jesus knew Judas's heart long before the betrayal ever happened. And yet He still washed Judas's feet. He still shared a meal with him. He still fulfilled His purpose. The betrayal of Judas didn't stop God's plan, it fulfilled it. That's the power of God's vision. He sees what we don't. He knows when someone is secretly against us. He knows when someone's motives are wrong. And when he allows betrayal to happen, it's not because he has abandoned us, it's because he is protecting us from something we cannot see. Sometimes we are so desperate to hold on to people that we don't realize they were never meant to stay. And because we don't see what God sees, he allows them to reveal their true colors. Not to hurt us, but to free us. If you've been betrayed, don't spend your energy trying to figure out why it happened. Don't waste your time replaying the pain over and over. Instead, trust that God is seeing something you can't see yet. He is positioning you for something greater. He is removing what needs to go so that he can bring in what is meant to stay. When people betray you, you may feel like you're losing, but in reality, you are being positioned for something better. God never allows something to be taken away without having something greater in store. He sees the road ahead, and if he lets someone walk away, it's because they were never meant to walk with you into your destiny. Trust his vision, trust his wisdom. Because even when you don't see it, he is already working on your behalf. Rejection is one of the most painful experiences a person can go through. It can make you feel unwanted, overlooked, and forgotten. When someone betrays you or walks away from your life, it can feel like you're losing something valuable. But what if the rejection you're experiencing is actually God's way of redirecting you towards something greater? What if the very thing that broke you was actually leading you to a breakthrough? In the Bible, there are so many stories of people who faced rejection, only to find out later that God was using it for their good. Take David, for example. When the prophet Samuel went to anoint the next king of Israel, David's own father didn't even consider him. Jesse lined up all of his sons except David, as if David wasn't even worthy to be an option. Talk about rejection, but what Jesse didn't know was that God had already chosen David. It didn't matter who overlooked him. God saw him, and when it was time, Samuel asked, "Are these all the sons you have?" That's when David was brought in from the field, anointed and chosen to be king. If David had let his father's rejection define him, he might have never stepped into his destiny. But God was redirecting him towards something greater. Sometimes God allows people to reject you because they are not meant to go where he is taking you. Instead of seeing rejection as a loss, see it as God's protection. That opportunity that didn't work out, that relationship that ended, that friend who betrayed you, it's all part of the bigger picture. You may not understand it now, but God is leading you somewhere better. What you thought was a setback was actually a setup for something greater. Look at Jesus. He was rejected by the very people he came to save. The religious leaders dismissed him, the crowds turned on him, and even his disciples abandoned him in his final moments. Yet his rejection led to the greatest victory in history, his resurrection. If Jesus had to endure rejection to fulfill his purpose, why do we think we won't have to go through it too? The rejection didn't stop Jesus. It positioned him for his greatest mission. God never allows rejection without a reason. He closes doors because he has something better prepared. He removes people from your life because they were only part of your journey, not your destination. The key is to trust him even when you don't understand. Instead of fighting rejection, start embracing God's redirection. Start mourning over what didn't work out and start looking ahead to what God is about to do. When someone betrays you, when an opportunity slips through your fingers, when you feel left out, remind yourself, this isn't the end. God is still writing your story. What looks like rejection today may be the very thing that leads you to the greatest blessing of your life. Jesus knew the pain of betrayal. He didn't just hear about it or witness it from a distance. He experienced it firsthand. One of his closest disciples, Judas, the man who sat at his table, listened to his teachings and walked with him for years, sold him out for 30 pieces of silver. And it wasn't just Judas. Peter, the one who boldly declared that he would never deny Jesus, turned his back on him 3 times in his greatest moment of need. The crowds that once shouted Hosanna turned around and screamed, "Crucify him!" Betrayal was woven into the very path that led Jesus to the cross. If Jesus, the Son of God, was betrayed, then why do we think we will escape it? Why do we act so surprised when people let us down? Jesus told his disciples in John 16:33, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." He was preparing them for reality. Betrayal is part of life. People will disappoint you. Friends will walk away. Those you trusted may fail you. But here's the good news. Betrayal does not have the power to stop God's plan. If anything, it plays right into it. Judas thought he was ending Jesus' ministry, but he was actually setting up the greatest victory in history. Without the betrayal, there would be no crucifixion. Without the crucifixion, there would be no resurrection. What looked like the ultimate act of betrayal was actually the doorway to salvation for the entire world. God used the betrayal of Judas to fulfill prophecy and bring about redemption. When you are betrayed, it's easy to feel like your life is falling apart, like the pain is pointless. But if you step back, you will see that God is always working, even through the actions of those who hurt you. Sometimes betrayal is the very thing that pushes you into your purpose. It forces you to grow, to seek God more, to step into places you never would have gone otherwise. Peter's story is a perfect example. After he denied Jesus 3 times, he wept bitterly. He was broken, ashamed, and probably thought he had ruined everything. But after Jesus rose from the dead, he didn't cast Peter aside. He restored him. Not only that, but he called Peter to be a leader in the early church. The same man who failed under pressure became the one who preached at Pentecost, leading thousands to Christ. His failure didn't disqualify him, it prepared him. God does not waste betrayal. He doesn't let it happen without purpose. It may hurt, but it will not destroy you. If Jesus could go through it and come out victorious, so can you. The same God who turned betrayal into resurrection power for Jesus will take what was meant to harm you and use it for your good. Trust him, because he is always working, even in the betrayal. When you've been betrayed, it's natural to want justice. You want the people who hurt you to feel the pain they caused. You want to defend yourself, to prove your innocence, to make things right. But the truth is, there are some battles you were never meant to fight. Some situations are so broken, so unfair, that no amount of effort on your part can fix them. That's why you need to remember this. God fights for you in ways you can't see. The Bible says in Exodus 14:14, the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. That's a hard verse to live out when you feel like people are lying about you, when they have turned others against you, when you feel like your reputation or future is on the line. But what if instead of trying to handle it on your own, you let God take care of it? What if instead of seeking revenge, you stepped back and trusted that God sees what they did and he will deal with it in his own way? David understood this better than anyone. Before he became king, he was hunted by Saul, a man he had been loyal to, a king he had faithfully served. Saul wanted David dead, even though David had done nothing wrong. David had opportunities to kill Saul, to take matters into his own hands, but he refused. He said in 1 Samuel 26:10, the Lord himself will strike him. Either his time will come and he will die, or he will go into battle and perish. David knew something we often forget. God is a better defender than we will ever be. When people betray you, mistreat you, or falsely accuse you, God is watching. He is not blind to your pain. He is not indifferent to your suffering. And he is not weak when it comes to justice. Deuteronomy 32:35 says, it is mine to avenge, I will repay. God sees the conversations you never heard. He knows the motives behind their actions. He understands the full picture. And in his perfect timing, he will bring justice in a way that is far better than anything you could accomplish on your own. But here's the challenge. Will you trust him to handle it? Will you resist the temptation to fight a battle that belongs to the Lord? Will you let go of the desire to prove yourself and instead rest in the fact that God will vindicate you at the right time? Sometimes God's defense doesn't look the way we expect. Instead of punishing those who hurt us right away, he works on their hearts. Instead of exposing them immediately, he gives them a chance to repent. And instead of making a public spectacle, he elevates us quietly, blessing us in ways that no one can stop. If you've been betrayed, slandered, or abandoned, don't waste your energy trying to get even. Trust that God is handling it. He is fighting for you, defending you, and working behind the scenes in ways you may not see right now, but one day you will. Even when you feel alone, abandoned, or misunderstood, trust that God is still in control. His defense is greater than any attack. Betrayal has a way of making you feel isolated, like you're fighting battles by yourself. The enemy wants you to believe that you have to defend yourself, that you have to prove your worth, that you have to fight back against those who hurt you. But God is saying, be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. It's hard to stay faithful when you don't see immediate justice. It's difficult to trust God's timing when the people who betrayed you seem to be getting away with it. But just because you don't see God moving doesn't mean He isn't working. Some of God's greatest defenses happen behind the scenes. He is blocking things you don't even know about. He is exposing lies before they ever have a chance to take root. He is preparing your next step while you're still dealing with the last betrayal. The story of David shows us what it means to trust God's timing. David was anointed to be king, but before he could take the throne, he was betrayed by King Saul. Saul, who once favored him, turned against him out of jealousy and tried to kill him. David had every reason to retaliate. He had opportunities to strike back, to take matters into his own hands. But he didn't. He waited on God. He trusted that if God had called him to be king, then God would be the one to make it happen. And he did. What if David had tried to rush the process? What if he had forced his way into his calling? He would have missed out on the refining that God was doing in him. That's what betrayal often does. It refines us. It teaches us to rely on God in ways we never would have otherwise. It stretches our faith. It builds our character. It makes us stronger. Sometimes the people who betray you are not meant to go where God is taking you. He allows certain people to walk away because they were only part of your story for a season. But you can't step into the next chapter if you keep holding on to the pain of the last one. You have to trust that if God removed them, it was for a reason. You have to believe that if He allowed the betrayal, He will also bring the restoration. God's timing is always perfect, even when it doesn't feel like it. When Joseph was thrown into prison after being betrayed, he didn't know how long he would have to wait for his deliverance. But when the time was right, God elevated him in a single moment. That's how quickly God can turn things around. One moment you're in the pit, the next you're in the palace. So don't give up. Don't let betrayal make you bitter. Stay faithful. Trust His timing and watch how He defends you in ways you never imagined. Conclusion. Betrayal is painful, but it is not the end of your story. When people turn their backs on you, when trust is broken, when the ones you depended on walk away, remember that God is still with you. He is your defender, your healer, and your restorer. What others meant for harm, God will turn for your good. You don't have to fight for revenge because God fights for you. You don't have to hold on to bitterness because God will restore you. And you don't have to fear the future because God is already ahead of you making a way. The betrayal you faced was not meant to break you. It was meant to position you for something greater. If Jesus overcame betrayal, so can you. If Joseph rose above the pit and the prison to fulfill his destiny, so can you. If David refused to take matters into his own hands and still became king, then your betrayal will not define you, it will refine you. So let go of the pain, release the bitterness. Trust that God sees, He knows, and He is working all things together for your good. You may not understand now, but one day you will look back and see that what felt like rejection was actually divine redirection. What seemed like loss was actually preparation for greater. God will defend you, God will heal you, and when it's all said and done, you will come out stronger, wiser, and more blessed than ever before. Keep your faith, keep your heart pure, and watch how God turns the betrayal into your breakthrough.